Hi, welcome to Smith and Grezzy. Today we're going to discuss the qualification for the national finals at the Royal Albert Hall. Just recently there was a great article on 4 Bars Rest, and we are joined by Iwan Fox, the editor of 4 Bars Rest, to help us explain a bit of that. But before we do that, we'd like to look at the other great contest in England, which is the British Open. So Sandy, do you want to give us a bit of an outline on that?
Yeah, I mean, strangely, I thought the best way to do this, to look at the overall picture of it, was to look at the British Open, first and foremost, because it has mechanisms in place to allow any band from anywhere to rise through the ranks and achieve success. So obviously the pinnacle of the British Open pyramid is the British Open contest itself in September. And then there are 3 contests which take place under the Spring Festival title in May. So you've got the Grand Shield, which qualifies you for the British Open. You have the Senior Cup, which if you do well in that, you get a promotion to the Grand Shield. And then the Senior Trophy, which is the bottom tier of those 3 contests in the Spring Festival. And again, if you do well in the Senior Trophy, you gain promotion to the Senior Cup. Below that, there are other qualification contests dotted round the UK, such as Wychavon Rochdale, which just took place recently, the Welsh Open, I think, which again took place recently, and I think there's one in Scotland as well, and maybe one in the south of England. So there are contests dotted round the UK which allow any band, if they fancy it, to gain acceptance into that pyramid structure and then work their way up to end up at the British Open. So the whole system is merit-based, not geographical. And I think we end up then with the British Open has the strongest field in British contests and has consistently had that for a long time. And one other thing that it also has is it was only a handful of different bands every year at the British Open. So you'll have the 2 bands from the previous year will get relegation back to the Grand Shield. 2 bands will obviously get promotion from the May and go to the September British Open. And then you've got the introduction now of foreign bands as well, which have been dotted about for the past few years as well. So the whole system for the British Open is merit-based, not geographical, and all those contests feed into each other right up to the top level. Does that about sum it up, you, in that sort of pyramid structure for the British Open?
Well, thanks for inviting me on the programme, chaps. I have to say, it's great. I've always been listening to great interest in what you talk about, each of the topics that covering in the banding world. I think just about you are with regards to the British Open Championships. As you said, it's a merit-based competition. It has been, throughout its history. The best bands are there at Symphony Hall, and there's a structure in place with the Spring Festival. And to get to Symphony Hall, you've got to go up through the divisions, and you do that by really on merit. Play the best on the day, and you get through. The qualification competitions, there's support as well for other events. As you say, there's one in Wychavon, one in Rochdale, the Welsh Open. There's also the Fife Charities competition up in Scotland, which is just taking place. So you've got those competitions. So there's a feeder all the way through. So if you want to get to the British Open Championships, bands know how to get there. And I think it's an important point to think that it is the British Open. It is open to bands throughout the world. People tend to think that, if you're not a British band, you can't get in. But if a European-based band wants to go to the Spring Festival, it can ask for an invitation. It may take them 3 years minimum, but it can get to the British Open that way, or it can get through the other way, which, as was announced today on 4 Bars Rest, is that if it goes to the European Brass Band Championships, either wins the European Championships like Tres Étoiles or is the highest placed European band, it'll get an invite now in the future to be part of the event there. So, as you say, it's a worldwide competition, but it's a worldwide competition based on merit.
One of the things we've been talking about the Royal Albert Hall is attendance. And we'll look at the reason, maybe some of the reasons for that later on. But the national finals at the Royal Albert Hall, the qualification is based on geographical location. So we've got 8 areas in the UK. But it can be proven that, and we did a thing about it in an early podcast, Simon, didn't we, about the top six and the bottom six?
We did.
We've sort of rejigged those figures a bit. And it can be proven that bands from certain geographical areas are consistently more successful than others over an extended period of time. Simon, you did the figures for this over the last...
Yeah, I did. Based on Iwan's fantastic article, I worked out how many bands had come in the top 10 from each area. So it reads as follows. Yorkshire have 26, Wales have 21, the Northwest has 18, and the Southwest has 16.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a big drop. The Midlands had 6, Scotland 5, London and Southern Counties 5, and the North of England 3. So there's a big disparity there, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, if you take as a minimum, each band from any area in the last 10 years has had 2 participants in the finals. Yeah?
Yeah.
So that's 2 times 10 is 20. So there have been 20 chances. I know it looks, you've got Yorkshire at 26 and Wales at 21. Those are because we have had the top 4 pre-qualifying. And if bands in that top 4 include the likes of Black Dyke, Brighouse, Corrie, Tredegar, whoever else, then they get an invite back. So that's why there are more than 20. But as a minimum, every area has had 20 chances to get into that top 10. Nobody's stopping anybody doing that.
You were involved in a discussion, in the early 1990s, wasn't you?
Yeah.
And many people don't know how the top 4 pre-qualifiers come about. Could you explain how it happened?
Yeah, I remember going... I was playing at Fairies at the time, and John Creswell, who was the band manager, and I went to a meeting in the YBS headquarters on Bradford Ring Road. It was a bit like this Leading Bands Forum. You know, these things have been tried umpteen times, and they stagger along for 2 or 3 years, and then they sort of drift away. And there was a discussion there, and I remember talking about and sort of proposing of inviting the top 6 from the Albert Hall, because at the time there was a lot of discussion about stronger areas not having enough representatives. And we talked about inviting the top 6 back, but everybody thought that was just a bit extreme. But they settled on inviting the top 4. Now, I can't remember exactly when it was, but that's the sort of thing that's how that came into being. And that was with the proviso that the bands that got the invites back still competed at their own area contests. The area contests seemed to think that it would diminish their audience and the interest in their area contests if those bands didn't compete. So that was the proviso.
Sandy, what sort of people were at this meeting?
Well, I mean, there was obviously top band representatives. So, I mean, you would have to go back to check at the time. There must have been representatives from Capital. Yeah, must have been. Yeah. I can't remember exactly how it was proposed. But again, that thing was brought in so that the stronger areas were rewarded with more places due to their achievements at the Albert Hall. Yeah. But again, there's never been anything to stop any band in any area taking advantage of the mechanism of 4 bands being invited back for the next year.
Yeah.
But when you look at it, there are 4 really strong areas, and there's a big drop off there from 16 from the Southwest to 6 for the Midlands. I mean, that's 10 bands missing. So there is a disparity, but there is nothing in place that's stopping those bands proving how good they are. And it can be proven just from the results that there are stronger areas and there are areas that are less competitive at the Albert Hall. So I would argue that there is equal opportunity for everybody, but they haven't taken advantage of it. And I think one of the problems with the Albert Hall, the field isn't strong enough. It doesn't compare with the British Open field. And
it's almost quantity instead of quality.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean,
it sounds a bit harsh, that, but these figures really show that.
yeah, I mean, and Ewan's right when he said in the article about the concise nature of Harrison's dream, 13 minutes long. That was deliberate. That wasn't just a coincidence or a perchance thing. Yeah, Philip Morris he wants a concise test piece, because the longer it is, it just draws the day out far more, and that hall is extortionately expensive. That was the background to the 4 qualifiers thing, but
Okay.
even that's getting a bit outdated now, I think, and I think we're coming to a sort of crisis point. We're going to take the bull by the horns. Things like this have happened before. If you look at where the contest was for donkey's years, Crystal Palace, and I saw some old articles and figures, and there were as many as 17 to 20,000 people there in the early years attending. And yeah, we know times have changed and blah, blah, blah and all that. Then Crystal Palace burnt down. And then it went to the Alexander Palace. Now, from what I can gather now, there was about 10,000 people attend that contest. The Alexander Palace even now holds 12,000. And then it moved to the Albert Hall, which the capacity of that is about 5,200. So, and it's the cost of the Albert Hall as well. It's extortionately expensive. So I think we are at a bit of a crisis point on it.
Ewan, how many do you reckon there was in the audience the other week?
Well, it's always a difficult one to actually pinpoint. I have to say, I've worked with Philip Morris, and we know Philip Morris, who has done so much for Welsh banding over the years. Mm-hmm. And you have to have a lot of sympathy for the situation Capital finds itself in. You have to look at, I think, in 2 separate ways. If you look at it in a banding way, this problem, you get all the passion, you get the arguments about, you've got to have these, everything has got to be kept the same. We've got to have bands given the same chance. It's a bit like the FA Cup and all this sort of stuff. All legitimate arguments that are put forward, done with a great deal of passion about people who want their banding to survive and flourish. But you've got to look at it also from a promoter's point of view. And if you're a promoter and you are paying northwards of £50,000 to hire a hall for a day, you've got to balance out how attractive it is to get people to pay premium prices in a premium city at a premium venue for a product which is really being sold to a smaller and smaller audience. So it's almost an impossible balancing act that he is actually faced with. So as much as we want to look at what you can do to try and improve the contest as a whole, that isn't the problem. The problem with the Albert Hall is just a symptom of a structural problem within banding in the UK. The structural problems are something that I've talked about, other people have talked about for a number of years. I wrote an article called State of the Nation in 2008. And that's where the problem lies. We are a regional-based competition. Mm-hmm. And then because of that, we try to then shoehorn that into a way which represents all of those regions at the Royal Albert Hall. But as you said, because of that, we have to then sacrifice part of the quality of the product that we put on there. Mm-hmm. And the problem with that is that by sacrificing the quality, the people who buy the tickets are then making informed decisions of how, whether or not they wish to go, or if they do go, what bands they actually go to and listen to. It'd be wonderful for everybody to say, let's turn the clock back and have the gala concert and get all the bands back in London, whatever. Those days are gone. That ship sailed a long, long time ago. No point trying to go back there at all. We have to come up with a modern, flexible, fit-for-purpose structure, which then relates to the national finals, both at Cheltenham and the Royal Albert Hall. The 2 chaps that you had on in one of your earlier broadcasts, the 2 Andys, they summed it up perfectly. They understood what it was all about. The broader picture is this. You've got to get the structures in place, first of all, to the point whereby you have to look at the grading of the bands and look at it on quality. This is not about elitism at all. This is about levels of excellence. You could be an excellent 4th section band, 3rd section band, 2nd section band, 1st section band, championship section band. But you've got to be realistic about yourselves or where you are in those different levels of excellence. Once you get that sorted out, then you can have a look at how you then, get that excellence to the national finals, both at Cheltenham and the Royal Albert Hall. And if you want to really have a product which is attractive to enough people to fill 5,000 seats in the Royal Albert Hall, you've got to have a radical reform of that event. But you can only have that if you get the structural problems sorted out to start off with. It's a bit like a bloke going into the doctor who's been smoking 70 cigarettes a day, and the doctor turns around and says, yeah, all you have to do is just change the brand. But he's still smoking 70 cigarettes a day and he'll still kill you. And that's what's been happening. We've been smoking and smoking and smoking, and all we're doing is saying, oh, I'm going to go light the tar on my cigarettes and we'll survive a little bit longer. We've got to stop all of that to do with it. And that's the reason why you can't be over radical, because I don't think there's an appetite for that on the banding side of it. But also you've got to show a progression whereby you can make the right steps towards a product which can be sold to the general public. Not just ourselves, we must attract a new audience to come and listen to us. And that means fewer bands, better quality, a more concise, compact day, and a better product. If we can do that, and it's very, very difficult to do, possibly, and I only say possibly, there's a future at the Albert Hall. But the other part to bear in mind is that we've got to ask the basic question, is the Albert Hall fit for purposes for a brass band event? Well, you talk about the British Open, and the audience for the British Open is about 2,100 people when it's sold out. And I emphasize when it is sold out. Right. 2,100 people at Symphony Hall is fantastic and it's a brilliant atmosphere. 2,100 people at the Royal Albert Hall is not even half full.
And Simon, you did a list of some of the main concert halls in Britain and abroad. Go on, just read some of these out here, because it's quite startling.
Symphony Hall holds around 2,200. Bridgewater Hall in Manchester is 2,400. The Royal Festival Hall in London is 2,500. Queen Elizabeth Hall in London again on the South Bank is 900. The Barbican is 1,100. The Royal Concert Hall in Nottingham, which is near where I live, is 2,000. The Royal Concert Hall in Glasgow is 2,400. Perth Concert Hall is 1,700. But the Royal Albert Hall is 5,200. Now, interestingly, our friends in Norway and Switzerland, the Norway Greek Hall is 1,400 capacity, and the Switzerland KKL in Lucerne is 1,800.
I mean, the Royal Albert Hall sticks out a mile there. I mean, are we just punching way above our collective weight now, thinking that the Royal Albert Hall is still... When you look at the Crystal Palace, then the Alexander Palace, then the Albert Hall, have we just... it's not outgrown it, have we? We've sort of... we can't fill it.
It's changed. We just got to realise that things have changed. As long as you realise that, it's a bit... And you go back to the point you talked about, the quality of the bands from different areas. Look at yourselves in the mirror and just look and say, right, where do I stand in the greater scheme of things? As as a player, so where you think you are as a player, B, where you are as a band, and C, where we are as a contesting organisation. If we are realistic about it, we can go to venues which are much more modern, much more accessible, offer a better acoustic, and a better listening experience for an audience. We have to then think about the product that we give them. Now, I don't know whether or not there's the way in which the Nationals are structured, that you could hold it as a set test and an own choice, because even if you had 10 bands, that's 20 performances, and then you need to have a long old day.
Back to square one.
You're back to square one. You can have a test piece, but as you say, you need to have a smaller field of higher quality. And the figures that you talk about over the last 10 years don't lie.
No, they don't.
But they are just the symptoms of, as I say, a structure which is unfit for purpose. And as I said, the two Andys who you had on previously, they summed it up perfectly. What's the reason why we have a national championship? It's to decide who are the best bands at different levels. But how do we do that? It must be regionally based, because that's the way in which competitions are actually structured in the UK. But it's got to be reflective of what the excellence is in each of those regions.
Yeah.
Again, it's a difficult, complicated thing to put together, but I think there is a way in which it can be done. I'm not the only one who was thinking about this. Other people had done it there. All I offered was two possible alternatives based on the fact that they've already made the decision to reduce it by one.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of it, that would only make a difference if you haven't got a test piece next year, which isn't longer than 13 minutes.
Yeah.
Because if you've got a 17-minute test piece, all of a sudden all that time is actually lost anyway. So you need to have something which is structurally different. So if you can do that, then I think there's an opportunity there to have a product which people will want to come to. But, and I will say this absolutely right from the front, the future for the national championships for me is not at the Albert Hall. And it's not getting more bands to London and turning it into something else. It's too expensive. Financially, it doesn't make much sense. And I think there are actually better venues for a better listening experience and enjoyable experience for the bands and the audiences.
My wife said, why don't you go to London this year? And I thought, oh, yeah, I fancy that. So I started looking at hotels and tickets. And I just said, no, I'm not going. It's too expensive.
No, I mean, there's been a hell of a lot of comments on the band and social media stuff about, and people just admitting that, basically. They'll go to the Open, but they won't go to London because the hotels are too much, the congestion charge, the train fares, everything else about the whole weekend just makes it. And then the straw that maybe breaks the camel's back is that the bands aren't as good.
No, so I think the experience you've got to have, the people, people will pay for quality.
Yeah.
You know, this is the reason why Amazon is so successful, because if you want rubbish, it'll come through your door cheaply the very next day. But if you want a bespoke Savile Row suit, guess what? You've got to wait 6 months for it.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a reasoning behind all of that. My suggestion with regards to the 10+8 and the 8+8 is simple. It's just to try and give a step in the right direction, which retains all the ethos of what the National Championships is about, which is regionally based and having representation, but also rewards merit, which you refer to at the British Open Championships, where the best bands are actually there. So the audience can come and listen to the best bands, but also in purely financial and promotional terms, it's good for the promoter. If they know that they've got the best bands coming back because they've been good enough, they can sell a better product. So we've got to look at it in that scope and forget about really the heartfelt passion and our traditions and heritage. Just look at it like a cold-eyed accountant and look at the bottom line and whether or not it actually adds up. And the only way for it to add up is to have fewer bands, better quality, and a shorter day.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you look at some of the social media stuff from the Albert Hall and the kudos for bands that maybe don't get there as regularly as others. The bands love getting to the Albert Hall. I mean, it is an iconic venue. It looks fantastic. And they want the kudos of saying, I played at the Albert Hall. You know, I get that. But you're subjecting the owner of the contest to at least a 50 grand, figure just to hire that hall, And I just think it's, are we way beyond that now? I noticed that some of the things that have been talked about recently about the why we need to sort of rejig things a bit. And I know that some of the things that were talked about in these meetings were about the figures for the strength of bands in areas, but there seems to be they're at cross purposes because they're looking at the smaller areas, such as the north of England and Wales, and maybe some of the larger areas are looking, saying, how come they can get more, the same amount of bands when we've got lots and lots of bands and we want to get them there? But that is just purely based on the number of bands they have, not on any sort of quality.
No, you've got to have, if we have a true pyramid structure within each of those regions, and I think the other part to remember with regards to that, I think it's patently unfair, you think, that, for instance, in Wales, 2 out of the 3 bands, because we only had 3 bands competing in the 4th section, 2 of them go forward. There's almost a sense of entitlement about that. There's no merit really based on that. So that part of it needs to be sorted out. However, if you've got a regional system where you've got more bands in your championship section than you have in your 4th section, You shouldn't be worried about whether or not two bands get it through from the fourth section. You want to be worried that there'll be no bands in the fourth section in 2 years' time. This is not. Correct. This is not like we're all middle class now, and this is like an inflation of meritocracy that we've got at the present time. Everybody wants to be a championship section band. Let's be a championship section band. We can do this. We can do that. What's wrong with being a really good fourth section, third, second, and first section band, and revel, and celebrate the excellence that you can have at those levels? It's all upside down. It's all the wrong shape, and that's where the core structural problem is. Everything else after that is just a symptom of it. And if we can sort out a little bit at the Albert Hall, that may rejig things for a little while. But this problem will keep coming back again and again and again, and it'll be more severe the next time because the foundation level, the grassroots level, is just withering and dying. And we're not doing anything to help it because we're not promoting it back in the right way.
Simon, we talked about this earlier in one of the podcasts about players joining first and mainly top section bands. We both had experience of this when they're not ready. So that and what it's doing is it's leaving the lower section bands literally bereft, playerless. Yeah, and I've had first-hand experience talking to people just this last week. Exactly that's happening. That there are players being snapped up by supposed championship section bands from first and second section bands, and you think there is no way that these players are really ready for that standard of banding.
It's happening a lot now.
Because there is still this sort of come and play with us. We're in this championship section, and then it leaves these lower section bands just with no players. So what Ewan's saying is exactly what's happening, and we've got evidence for that as well. That it's just leaving the lower sections.
Yeah, we could promote a different change of attitude and just say, I find one of the problems is almost depressing that all these bands, we're all championship section bands, they say, whatever. Now, some of them maybe, some of them maybe not. But invariably they're not, because first of all, the level of standard that they're playing at, and B, a lot of them are relying on borrowing players in to go to competitions, many of which are the type of competitions, even at the British Open or other events, where you can actually borrow players to compete. Now, that may be different with regards to percussionists and whatever, that's slightly a different matter. But you can't tell me that the vast majority of championship section bands, when they turn up on the Monday night after they've been to the Albert Hall or one of the major competitions, that they got a full band full of their own players playing around the stands.
No,
they haven't. So, and then they look at the mirror and they say, but we're a championship section band. And that's why I go back to the point, going back to the national finals, we have to reward in some way the most consistent bands.
Yes.
Yeah.
If we do that and give those, and people then can see, there's a formula to it. The best bands are the best bands for a reason. Invariably, they've got the better players, good conductors, but invariably they're well run as well. And that's one of the reasons why those bands are highly successful. Other bands will come up and other bands will come down, but that's the reason for. The reason why I said about the 10+8, I think it's a step in the right direction to reward the excellence, also keep the regionality part of it as well, so nobody felt
that's important,
left out at all. But if you can't get into the top 10 at London, I don't see why you should have an entitlement to have an extra place just because you got more bands in your section, in your area, because there's no incentive then for those areas to reduce the numbers in terms of quality. All they would think about is quantity.
That's a really good point.
And that's where the problem lies. So we've got to try and have try and incentivize bands and regions to celebrate excellence. And if it means only 4 bands in their top section, but you've got 15 bands in an absolutely brilliant battle in 4th section, surely that's a good thing. If it's the other way around, when you've only got 4 in the 4th section and 15 mediocre bands in your top section, that's nothing to be joyful about whatsoever.
No.
I did a little research today, and based on this year's results, next year, on a 10 and 8 basis, you would have 3 bands from the southwest, 2 bands from northwest, 4 from Yorkshire, 1 from the north. Scotland would have 2, London 2, and Wales 3, which mirrors what's been going on the last 10 years.
It does. I mean, when you look at 10 pre-qualifiers and 8 sort of new bands, one from each region, initially when I read that in Ewan's article, your initial reaction is, whoa, that's really radical and sort of a bit like miles away from where we are at the moment. But when you sit down logically and think about it that way, it works. It does work. And it gives those bands that are already achieving the stability to go back and keep working at that. But it doesn't stop any other band from any region doing that. You know, even as an example, and I don't want to single out any region, but if you're in a small region with 7 or 8 bands in your top section, there is nothing to stop you over the next. If this system was taken up, you could end up with all 7 bands.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go back to you boys have played in Yorkshire, haven't you? Right?
Yeah.
It's one of the great joys always coming up to Yorkshire to be told how brilliant Yorkshire bands are. As a Welshman, it's great. Never tell them that the Welsh are okay as well. But you think of it, this was the odd thing about this decision. Almost, it was self-defeating for Yorkshire banding. It was, it was like, Yorkshire banding committing Harry Carey, wasn't it? Because they were, we'll do it for the greater good. If Yorkshire banding is that good, in the end, you're right, it's unlikely to happen, but you could have 5 or 6 Yorkshire bands at the finals.
In the top 10, yeah.
Yeah, but bear in mind, Flowers, who are in the Southwest, they are now the national champions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now they will bring along with them. Albon band have done really well as well, so they will have 3 bands at the national final. Now next year, those bands, the Southwest could have 4 bands there or 5 bands.
Exactly.
It's all it does is shows where almost where the spectrum is of strength of banding in the UK, and it does move about every now and again.
Yeah. But it doesn't stop it moving about this.
No, that doesn't stop it. That's the thing. It's not a barrier to excellence. And if it means, and again, I go back to the point, you have a look at what's happening at the Senior Cup and the Senior Trophy. London and Southern Counties bands have been really good down there. All of a sudden, they are starting to come through. Scottish bands at Cheltenham in the lower sections never came anywhere for donkey's years. All of a sudden, all the long-term planning which has gone in is starting to pay off.
Yeah.
And it may be a longer-term thing that we will see before we really get the full benefit of this. But you've got to invest in it in the long term. It's no quick fix with regards to this. Whether or not it's at the Albert Hall or not, that's a separate matter. But the key part of it, if you look at it at regional level, get that sorted out, I think there is a positive future ahead. But doing it just by saying we'll sort out something at the Albert Hall, but leave the other part of it alone, nothing. That's just a recipe for disaster. Both of them have got to go hand in hand.
One of the other radical solutions I've heard muted, people are talking about, I don't know how serious this is, but it's about absorbing the numerically smaller areas into the bigger areas. So, for example, what I've heard is the smallest numerical areas are the north of England and Wales. So there has been some talk I've heard that the plan would be to redistribute those areas' bands into adjacent areas. So, for example, the north of England's bands would be redistributed to Yorkshire and Scotland. The Welsh bands to be redistributed to the west of England and the northwest. So there has been talk, you'll know more about this than I do, but the bands from North Wales being reluctant to travel to Swansea, they would rather go to Blackpool or whatever.
Well, they did years ago, there was a lot of times that the bands, I used to go there years ago. There was a time, in fact, we used to have a North Wales area and a South and a Welsh area, in effect, that part of there. But, whoever come up with that idea has most probably been living in a brown paper bag for the past 25 years. I mean, there's a thing called devolution. Do you think the Scots would just open the English in with open arms? Come to Perth, beat. do they, remember Culloden and all this sort of stuff, and that's what be happening there. And the same in Wales. These, basically, it is a Scottish championship.
Exactly.
It isn't an area. It is the Scottish championship, and we're always reminded of that. And it is the Welsh championship.
Yeah,
okay,
very correct.
Bands that win those two events are the bands that represent their nations at the European Championships. So that I can't even see that being.
No, I can't. I mean, to play devil's advocate with it. To play devil's advocate with it, I did mention this to someone I was talking to who was discussing this, and I said, well, what happens to Wales and Scotland who have the Scottish Championships? And I remember getting into the bother years ago when I talked to people in Scotland, friends, and said, oh, how did you play at the area? And I got a right telling off, because it is, and as I already knew, it's the Scottish, they call it the Scottish Championships. It's not the area, as we would call the Yorkshire area, or whatever else. But they were on about, these bands being absorbed into these regions. And they said, oh, well, they'll still be champions of the north of England. But even if they finish below 5 or 6 Yorkshire bands, they'll still be considered the north of England champions. I mean, I just don't see how it's going to.
I think that's one for the birds. I think there is an argument. I think there are bands. You can look around. I think it's in the Midlands area and some in the southwest. I think, isn't it like the bands around Derbyshire way? Some of them are actually closer to, even though they're in Derbyshire or something like, I think, aren't like Matlock and bands like that sitting around there. They're actually closer to an area, a different area. I think you can have a look in those type of bands in terms, and basically say, how far away are you? Is it easier for you to go to the southwest than it is to go to London, the southern counties, for instance, right? I don't think that's a problem, because you're helping bands in that respect. Yeah. The North, the ones with regards to the North Wales, that's for the Welsh to sort out. Okay. Wales has got to sort something out with regards to that. We have it in Swansea. We've been in Wrexham. We've been in London. So we've got to try and sort out something. And again, looking at the numbers in Wales, and I don't mean with just regards to the bands themselves, looking at the number of people who come and pay through the door to listen to the Welsh Area Championship, that's a real concern. That can be sorted out by the Welsh if they've got the desire to do it, which is, again, is a complicated separate matter there. The Scots, they're doing fine. They don't need any help. They don't need the addition. Leave them alone. They're best being left alone most of the time anyway, the Scots. But
thanks very much.
They do that. They're fantastic. And the Yorkshire, but what they have to do is look at themselves in the mirror and just say, as a region or as a nation, whatever, do our bands represent the best that they are in the sections that they are? Mm-hmm. And the bands themselves have got to turn around and say, guess what? We're really a first section band. Put us in the first section and that's where we are. But how many of them have got the guts, the option and the realism to do that? How many conductors, all of whom want to conduct or DV Media Nocte and Jesus in Tibet, are all thinking to themselves, because that's all they want to do, and they look at themselves and say, do I really want to be conducting Introduction, Elegy and Caprice? And they all think no, until they have a look at the score and find out how difficult it actually is. So it's that realism. They've got to be realistic about where they stand, both as individuals, both as bands, and then as a region as a whole, as your own banding community, and say, where do we fit into the greater picture? If you can get that right, and it's a heck of a task to do, then there's a positive future ahead. If not, people like me, for the next couple of years, I'd just be writing about the demise of yet another event. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that.
I spoke to you, Ewan, recently, and I said, are we at a real critical point now? Do we have to actually do something pretty drastic, or we miss this opportunity and we just...
I think we've missed so many opportunities. I'm looking back at articles I was writing. I wrote something about the lessons of COVID and audience development in 2021, arts funding 2022, question of succession for banding and contests 2022, representation for bands in 2023, how to work together in 2023. How can we learn off rugby league? How they grade their accomplishments. That was something I did again. I've written tons of it. I think people may be fed up of me going on about it, but the longer that nothing is done, the harder it's actually going to be to do something. And this may be the last realistic chance of doing something at our most visible event, which is at the Royal Albert Hall, but using that as the catalyst to change those structural problems in the regions. Once that is done, speak to people as well. Speak to Brass Bands England. Find out what they are doing, how they can then be... You can work together to help, especially grassroots banding. And then how we celebrate excellence at all those different levels. Not about how the elite can get on and play and be on WOB play and all that sort of stuff. It's about how we get different levels of excellence all the way through. For me personally, I get more enjoyment listening to really good second, third and fourth section bands playing pieces they can play really well than listening to an elite level top section band just doing virtuosic acrobatics at a competition. Play good music, play it well at a standard you can play it at. There's nothing better than that.
No, there isn't. And even recently, I've seen some things, bands at contests playing pieces that in own choice contests in Britain, and thinking, really, that band played some of these big mega European test pieces? No, I'm sorry. No, they didn't. They're trying to play pieces that a handful of bands in the world can play properly, but again, and pretending that it's good.
Go back to the point, as you said, the reason why Harrison's Dream was picked for the national finals, it's still a fine piece, and it showed itself to be a very fine piece to do that. But the basic premises was because it's 13 minutes long.
Yeah.
That was it. It's the other, there are plenty of really fine pieces at 30 minutes, but it'd be an awful thing to think that we would have a system whereby you pick a piece of music on this duration first of all, rather than whether or not it's a good enough piece of music. Yeah. I've got no problem listening to 18.5-minute pieces played by brilliant bands, or 10-minute pieces played by decent bands playing really well, who could play with style. I could do something else rather than just playing the right notes in the right place. But you can only do that if you go back, and I keep repeating myself, you've got to get the structures, the very basic foundations of what regional banding is made of in Britain. You've got to get that right. Everything else is just a consequence of getting things wrong.
So this 10 and 8 thing, which I think is probably the most attractive proposition on the table at the moment, how do we go about getting that more traction in banding?
Well, I can play devil's advocate here, right, and say you've got to do what Capital Promotions has actually offered the regions. It offers the regions autonomy. Okay, the decision to reduce the number from 20 to 19 wasn't Capital's decision, wasn't Philip Morris's decision. It was voted on by the regional secretaries. Okay, now the regional secretaries will come to that meeting with opinions or proposals put forward to them by their member bands. That's democracy in action. The biggest problem is how many of your bands that send a representative armed with a proposal or armed with information that can affect your band and takes that to either the annual general meeting or to one of the meetings of the regional committee. How many?
None.
None. See, on the one hand, everybody's having to go at, Philip Morris and Capital on the one hand, and he's saying to you, you've got the opportunity to do this. Bands, you've got the opportunity to do this. Come up with proposals, give it to your representatives, get the backing of it. So if the championship section bands in Yorkshire say, yep, we want to get 4 bands back at London, so let's see if we can get better representation, get the back in there, get the bands to work together, i.e. using this UK Leading Bands Forum, and all the bands, supposedly the top bands are on there, making sure that the bands are a part of that in their areas, put it forward to their representatives. And you go more banded. I know it sounds a bit awful, but that's the way in which the politics of life works. Yeah. And you force through a proposal. And Philip Morris he's upfront about it. If it comes from the bands, And it's shown, that it's not, financial suicide. But if you go through with a proposal which is agreed by the majority of the representatives who are representing the majority of the top section bands, that can be done. And the same thing applies with regrading. If Yorkshire or Wales or the North West or Midlands are really honest about themselves and they want to get their banding at regional level in a better shape, go forward and put a proposal to your representative to take to the capital promotions panel. It will be voted on. Okay, and interestingly, they looked at the situation at the last meeting, I understand, about borrowing players. And there was a proposal put forward, I understand, which was that bands in the third and the fourth section could borrow players of third and fourth section standard from other third and fourth section bands to help them go to the regional contest, even from other areas.
Okay.
And instead of voting it through, the representative said, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. We'll take it back to our bands to discuss.
Okay.
So it does work. You see, there is something that actually does work with regards to that. So those things I think can happen, but you've got to know how it works, how democracy works in banding. It's great to be a dictator in banding. It's marvelous. You can do whatever you want to. You've been in bands, both of you.
Yeah.
The only voice that holds authority is the man who's got the stick. Anything else doesn't matter. But that doesn't possibly make for a happy band. But if bands want to do it, they've got to really start thinking, not with their hearts, with their heads, and be realistic about where they stand in the greater scheme of things. If they can do that, I think, again, as I said, there is a future for it. If not, we are dead in the water.
I think you're right.
I do think we have reached that point where something has got to be done, and this is why we wanted to make this programme, basically just to put it out there that there are options, and that I implore people to think about them. Like Ewan says, get yourselves to these meetings.
I think maybe the band reps or a representative from individual bands, they need to be contacting their regional secretaries, don't they, and saying, right, what are you talking about? Because there is a meeting in November. So maybe they need to be contacting the regional secretaries and saying, okay, is any of this stuff any good? Is it worth discussing? Is it, we think it's a good idea. Will you put it forward? Or they might have other ideas. I don't know. But it just seems like it's a bit of a secret society in certain ways.
Well, again, I don't think it is. If you don't want, if you want to be represented, go to the meetings.
Yeah.
Don't complain when decisions are made on your behalf if you've not been anything to do with the process. It's like people who don't vote. They all complain about the state of the country, and you say, well, we voted for, I didn't vote for anybody. Well, you're not invested in the process. There's too many people, I would say, were not invested enough in the process. You see it all the time. You see it by people complaining about, why should I buy a ticket? Why should I do this? Why should I support an event? Why should I go to a concert given by another brass band? There's no investment in the thing that we actually do. If you look at other people in other, hobbies and things that they're actually doing, there's a much more deeper investment that they make in what they do. So they will actually go and support. You've seen it in Norway. You see it in Switzerland. The people themselves are much more invested in both the banding community, if you is the best way to describe it. So they want to be represented. They want to have their voices heard. They want to go in and support other bands. Yeah. That's the bit that we've actually lost. And it's that sense of apathy that we've got now, which permeates everything. There is I'm not going to put any blame at all on any of the regional representatives, because they're doing a damn hard job. And if you want to see, just have a think of the rubbish that they've got to put up with from the bad behaviour of people at regional contests year in, year out, who think they're entitled to everything under the sun. So I won't have anything said against any of those, because they do a damn hard job. But they can only go to meetings armed with proposals if the bands themselves are proactive to put those proposals forward to them.
We do seem to have a bit of an attitude here in this country about what's in it for my band. How is my band going to either benefit or lose out? And my decision will be based purely on that, rather than, we can't see the bigger picture, can we? You get that all the time where people
Very
are just making
self-centered.
decisions. Yeah. Well, you know, what's in it for us? We'll be demoted. I don't want that. I still want to be, you know, whatever section it is. You see that all the time. You know,
they do, but the problem is that the outside world sees it with us. That's the worry.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate, you know. I go to meet people from, you know, in different parts of the music business and spheres and that type of stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we always think one of the arguments you hear people say, oh, you know, the outside world doesn't understand what we do. It's like an inverted snobbery that we've got about what we do. They don't understand contests. They wouldn't understand a great performance of Cloudcatcher Fells, this person from the orchestra, you know. Do you know what? Yes, they would. It's not difficult to do. It's not secret. Playing in tune isn't, you know, something that only we can know about, or, you know, how fast the movement should go. These people know damn well everything about us, and especially the people who organise things.
Right.
You know, the people who go to the people who organise the proms, the people at the big festivals, they are looking at brass bands all the time and finding out which bands or what organisations are making progress going forward. You know, Brass Bands England are doing so much good stuff in many ways, okay? And it's being recognised. That's why they get an extra funding. Again, Creative Scotland has recognised the good work that's being done in Scotland. Wales, we haven't done anything at the moment, so we're at a low stead. Individual bands and organisations, you go down to Amersham Band or Wantage and these bands, you know, who are actually doing things within their community, and then you were finding that all of a sudden they've got a grant of £100,000 to help them build their band room. There's a band up in Scotland has just got something because they're doing the right thing. So it is out there if we act professionally, show that we are professional, and show that we have got a movement or a contesting movement which is fit for the 21st century, not stuck in the 19th century with us just twiddling about thinking we can make cosmetic changes and everything will be all right. Radicalism is needed. So, you know, if we can do it and a step in the right direction, having 10 plus 8, if that's the first radical step, bring it on.
You see, I mean, that it does look on paper, you think, oh, radical. And then you look at it properly and you think, it's actually not that radical at all. You're just rewarding like you do at the British Open. You know,
you're losing 2 bands, and you're not really losing 2 bands at all. You know, the British Open field has been down to 16 or 17 bands.
Yeah.
And to put it bluntly, this for many people that's still a long day.
Yeah.
You know, if there were 14 bands or 15 bands, and the same at London. If you were there, unless the days of going there with a thermos flask and your sandwiches and sitting in the front row with Blacklight Jack or whatever his name was, one of those chaps, and sitting there all day, they have gone. You could go to London, British Open in parts, but London especially, and you could pick your 7 bands, and you would be most probably guaranteed that 5 of those will be in your top 6.
Yeah.
People are not dull anymore. They know exactly who they want to hear. Unless you're there supporting a newer band. But I was at the Albert Hall this year. I was in the champagne bar on the Grand Tier, as I normally go to, not drinking the champagne. And there was a period of time, I think it's from Corey played, I think, number 10. I think Rodrigo was on to like number 15. So there's like a 2.5 hour spell. There were more people in the bar than there were most probably in parts of the hall. The people were completely disengaged with the competition because they knew those bands were not going to feature in the prizes.
Yeah.
And that's an awful thing that we've come to, where people will pay 45 quid for a bottle of wine or £8.50 for a bottle of beer rather than go in and listen to a performance from a band. But that's what we've actually got to, and we've got to that situation at the Albert Hall.
It's been interesting, this. I'm really into this proposal, personally. So we've put it out there, tried to back up the article that Ewan has kindly done. Let's see where it takes us, but we're not going to get anywhere sat in a pub chewing over the fat. We need to get to these meetings and put proposals in.
Yeah, and I think this 10A, it allows every single band in the country to achieve success based on merit. We're not stopping anybody from anywhere doing this. And if they can consistently come in the top 10 at London, they will play there. Or wherever it ends up being, they will be playing at the national finals, championship section contest. I don't see the problem with it at all. It allows every band the chance to achieve success, no matter where they're from. For me, I think it's a good proposal. I think it needs discussing more and needs putting forward, see what everyone else thinks.
Yep.
Yeah. But as I say, other people have done it before me. It's not my. People have said this about this some time. People have been put through the 8+8 as well as whatever.
Yeah.
But as a stepping stone to where we hopefully want to go, and as a catalyst for more fundamental change, possibly that's the best way forward at the moment, which will balance what the bands want, what the audience want, and what the promoter wants. And if you can do that in banding, if you get all three of those right, my word, I'd be up for a Nobel Prize. If we can do that. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see. I think that's for the future.
So that's enough for this week from Smith and Grezzy. Many thanks to our guest, Iwan Fox from 4 Bars Rest. It's been great having you along, Iwan. And if you've got any comments, please send them into the Facebook site, and we'll see you shortly with another programme. Thank you.